John 9:1. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. He was blind since he was born. Baby grew up, the man was blind his whole life. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. John 9:2. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned? Teacher, who is guilty of his blindness? This man? Did the blind man sin? Or his parents? Did the blind man's parents sin? That he was born blind. Why is he blind? Why was he born blind? And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents, that he was born blind? John 9:3. Jesus answered, Neither this man didn't sin, nor his parents sinned. His parents didn't sin, but that the works of God, the miracles of God, should be revealed in him. Works of God displayed. Jesus tells his disciples about the blind man. Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. John 9:4. I must work the works, Jesus working. I must work the works of him who sent me. God sent Jesus. Go. While it is day, the night is coming when no one can work. Jesus and his disciples. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. John 9:5. As long as I am in the world, while Jesus is in the world, I am the light of the world. Jesus tells his disciples. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground. John 9:6. And made clay with the saliva, the spit, mud or clay. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man. And he said to him, Go, blind man. Wash in the pool of Siloam. Go and wash, which is translated sent. Jesus made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with clay. And he said to him, Wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. John 9:7. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Yay. So he went and washed and came back seeing. John 9:8. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind, neighbors and others who knew him when he was blind, storekeepers, people at the bank, said, Is this not he who sat and begged? Please give me money. Isn't this the beggar? Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is this not he who sat and begged? John 9:9. Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. Not him, but someone similar. He said, I am he. It's me. Therefore they said to him, How are your eyes opened? There's a former blind man. Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, How are your eyes opened? John 9:11. He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay, made mud, and anointed my eyes. Jesus and the blind man, and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. Jesus and the blind man. He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes, and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. The previously blind man explains how his eyes were opened. John 9:11. So I went, and washed, and I received sight. Yea. Then they said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. I wonder what his name is. Former blind man. So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. John 9:13. They brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. They brought him to the church leaders. These are like neighbors and people who knew him. Now it was the Sabbath, the day of rest. You're not supposed to work. When Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. They brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. John 9:15. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received sight. How were your eyes opened? Former blind man is asked by the Pharisees. He said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Former blind man talking to the Pharisees. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received sight. He said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. John 9:16. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God. Jesus is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. He doesn't keep the law or the traditions. Jesus doesn't keep the law. He doesn't keep the Sabbath traditions. So he's not from God. He doesn't keep it, not from God. Some Pharisees said. Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, John 9:16, How can a man who is a sinner, Jesus a sinner, do such signs? How can a sinner do such miracles? Other Pharisees said. And there was a division among them. They were separated and arguing. Others said, How can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. John 9:17. They said to the blind man again, What do you say about him? What does the former blind man say about Jesus? Because he opened your eyes. Pharisees and former blind man, what do you say? He said, He is a prophet. Jesus is a prophet, proclaimer of the will of God or the word of God. Pharisees are talking with the former blind man. They said to the blind man again, What do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes. He said, He is a prophet. John 9:18. But the Jews did not believe concerning him. We don't believe that he had been blind and received his sight. We don't believe you. We don't believe you were sighted. Blind, sight received. We don't believe it happened. Until they called the parents of him who had received sight. Come here, parents of the former blind man. And they asked him, saying, Is this your son, the former blind man? The Jews and the parents. Sorry, I forgot to read that again. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, Is this your son? John 9:19, who you say was born blind? The parents say he was born blind. How then does he now see? How can he see? The Pharisees, the former blind man, and his parents. Who you say was born blind. How then does he see? John 9:20. His parents answered them, and said, We know, little brain there, that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees? How does he now see? How does he see now? Or who opened his eyes? Who did this? We don't know. The parents say. His parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, or who opened his eyes? John 9:21. We do not know. We don't know. He is of age. He's an adult. Ask him. The Jews should ask the former blind man. He will speak for himself. The Jews, the sons, and the parents. And the parents say, "Ask our son, don't ask us. We do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself." John 9:22. His parents said these things. "We don't know. Ask him yourself." Because they feared the Jews. Oh no. For the Jews had agreed already. "We agree. Let's do it. That if anyone confesses that he was Christ, he's the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue, kicked out. You must leave." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. John 9:23. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him. He's old enough. Ask him yourself." The Jews, the parents, and the former blind man. So they again called the man who was blind. "Man who is blind, come back." And said to him, "Give God the glory." It's all to God. Give God glory. "We know that this man is a sinner." Jesus is a sinner, the Jews say. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." I guess tell the truth. John 9:25. He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not." Jesus is a sinner or not a sinner? "I do not know." I don't know, says the former blind man. "One thing I know, this I know, that though I was blind, now I see. Before I was blind, now I see." Previously blind man. He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." John 9:26. Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? What happened?" Jesus and the blind man. "How did he open your eyes? How did Jesus perform this miracle?" The Pharisees and the former blind man. He answered them, "I told you already," says the former blind man. Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already." John 9:27. And you do not listen. You're not listening. Why do you want to hear it again? You want to hear what happened again? Why? Do you also want to become his disciples? Do you want to follow him? You Pharisees want to follow Jesus too? The Pharisees and the former blind man. And you do not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples? Do you also want to become his disciples? John 9:28. Then they reviled him. The Pharisees insulted and abused the healed man and said, "You are his disciple." The healed man follows Jesus, but we are Moses' disciple. The Pharisees follow Moses, the Pharisees and the healed man. Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciple." John 9:29. We understand that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, Jesus, we do not know where he is from. Where did Jesus come from? The former blind man and the Pharisees. What's going on? We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. John 9:30. The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing. This is amazing, that you do not know where he is from. Who is he? Where is he from? We don't know. Pharisees don't know. Yet he has opened my eyes." Done a miraculous thing. Jesus is a miracle worker. But you don't know. The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from. Yet he has opened my eyes." John 9:31. Now we know that God does not hear sinners. God doesn't listen to sinners. I can't hear you. You're sinning. That blocks us. But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Worshippers who follow God's will, that's an opening, God hears them. Former blind man tells the Pharisees, "Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him." John 9:32. Since the world began, since the beginning of the world, it has been unheard of, nobody's ever heard of this, that anyone opened the eyes of one who was blind. It was never heard that someone opened the eyes of a blind man since birth. Previously blind man tells the Pharisees. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. John 9:33. If this man were not from God, if Jesus were not from God, he could do nothing. Jesus couldn't do miracles and signs. If he wasn't from God, he could do nothing. Jesus must be from God. Healed, and I crossed out blind man. Healed man, tells the Pharisees. John 9:34. Then they answered and said, "You were completely born in sin, and you are teaching us? We were born into sin, and you're teaching us, lecturing teacher. You're doing that, you're teaching us." And they cast him out. "How dare you? Leave." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born to sins, and are you teaching us?" And they cast him out. John 9:35. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. "He's been cast out," the former blind man. And when he had found him, Jesus found the healed man. He said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God? Do you believe?" Jesus asked the former blind man. He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord? Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? I want to believe." The previously blind man said. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I might believe in him?" And Jesus said, John 9:39, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see," blind man to sighted man, "and that those who see may be blind," sighted man becomes blind man. Jesus says, and Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be blind." John 9:37. And Jesus said to him, "You have both." Oh no, I'm missing one. And John 9:37. And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him." I think the blind man says, "Where is he?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, you have seen him." The healed man has seen Jesus, and it is he who is talking with you. He's talking with you. "You see me, and I'm talking to you." Previous blind man and Jesus. Then he said, "Lord, I believe." The healed man believes in Jesus, and he worshipped him. The healed man worshipped Jesus. Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. John 9:40. Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words. Some of the Pharisees heard the words and said to him, "Are we blind also? Are we blind Pharisees also?" Jesus and some of the Pharisees. And some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" John 9:41. Jesus said to him, "If you were born blind Pharisees, you would have no sin. You would be innocent, no guilt. But now you say, we do see, therefore your sin remains. You are guilty." Jesus and some of the Pharisees. Jesus said to them, "If you were born blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains.